And he spent a lot of time in the military, had an encounter when he was younger, and had an encounter even back in 2005. Both were close-up visual sightings of the creature. And I know Waylon's actually a drone pilot now, and we're hoping to utilize some of his skill to finding these creatures. If you've had an encounter you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email, wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And I want to let everyone know, Mark Zaski from Florida will be flying in Monday. Him and I are going to spend some time out next week. I'm hoping to take him up to Ape Canyon, Ape Caves, up on top of Mount St. Helens. I know the storm that was here a few weeks ago has passed, and it's been pretty mild. So we're hoping to go up there. I will film everything, like always, for you guys. I will post it up to the website. And I hope you guys enjoy it. It might be a little bit different than your normal shows, but I'm hoping that we can get enough footage to where there's a ton of shows next week. And it's mainly Mark and I heading up to these locations, showing you guys these locations. And who knows, maybe we'll get lucky while we were up there. I wanted to thank everyone for being here tonight. And I wanted to go ahead and welcome Waylon to the show. Waylon, thanks for being here. I appreciate you coming on and talking about your encounters, talking about some of the drone technology. So thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure. I've been a long-time listener, long-time fan, and really enjoy the forums and everything that you guys are doing.
And if you would, you had 2 encounters out in East Texas. Could you kind of start from the beginning and tell the audience what you were out doing, and then just walk us right into the encounter?
All right, not a problem. My family has been in the same area since 1860, the same piece of land. And we were pretty much just camping about a mile and a half away from the house. It was a friend of mine. I called him my brother. He was basically a foster child that my parents took care of for several years, and this would have been 1985, 1986 time frame. I was still in high school, and I remember I wasn't driving yet. But we were camping. There was an area, again, not too far from the house that we called the Enchanted Forest. It opened up into a really nice new growth pine forest or pine grove, probably about 7 or 8 acres, a nice, gentle, swelling ground. And all you had was pine needles and young pine trees. There was no yopon, no undergrowth. So it was a fun place to hang out, fun place to play, and we were actually thinking about trying to build a log cabin out there as kind of a clubhouse or something out of some of the deadfall that was there. So we were out there. We had cooked some hamburger meat earlier in the evening, and we finally laid down to go to sleep. We just had a couple of sleeping bags with us. We did have an axe for chopping wood, and we had a 22 pump action rifle with us. I was asleep. The fire had died down, and I woke up to Blaine, my brother, basically saying, "Waylon, wake up." And when he finally aroused me, I looked at him across the campfire, and he was sitting straight up, and he was looking toward the High Line area that actually passed within about 100 yards of this little grove where we were camped. He said, "There's somebody out there watching us." And so I stood up and looked, and I didn't really see anything. So we started throwing logs on the fire. We, with all the deadfall around there, we had plenty of firewood. We did have, the old school fueled Coleman lantern. And while we were putting wood on the fire, I actually grabbed the lantern and got it lit again and pumped it up and cranked it up as high as it would go. And about 60 or 70 feet from us, on the edge of the firelight, basically, and between us and the High Line was this figure standing there. At first, we thought that perhaps it was a person, although we didn't know who. The area around our ranch was basically 25,000 acres of nothing. It was owned by Texas billionaire, George Mitchell, that owned Mitchell Energy. So it was protected. There were a couple of homesteads here and there, but no one outside of the family that would have even been within really walking distance through the woods. So we walked toward it thinking that perhaps it was one of my uncles or perhaps my dad had decided to come out there and scare us. And then when we moved toward it, it actually stood up, and we saw that it was not a person. It wasn't huge. It wasn't, 9 or 10 feet tall like some are. It was probably 6.5 feet, 6'4", 6'5". It was wide across the shoulders and the chest. It had the barrel chest, but it wasn't 4 feet wide, obviously. It was just big and strong and muscular, especially compared to us. Now, compared to us, it was huge. We were just two skinny teenage boys. But based on, some of the things that I've read and other witness accounts, this was not we didn't think that it was, like a mature male or something like that. I thought for years that perhaps it was an adolescent until Bob Garrett actually told me, no, you just saw a different type that happened to be in the area. I never could see its eyes, even though we were close to it. We had the lantern cranked up, and the lantern kicked out that green glow from the mantles that were in it, but you could tell they were really deep set, and it did nothing. It just looked at us. It just watched us. It kind of went into this slouched position from where it had been. It had been kind of stooped over, and then it stood up, and it kind of settled back into this slouched, kind of the shoulders hunched forward position. It was red, and it was I could tell that it was basically the same color as the pine needles on the ground of the tree trunk of the trees that it was standing next to. So it would have blended in really well in the daytime. And I believe the black that I was seeing was probably seeing maybe its skin through the hair. And that's what maybe gave it the model appearance. I mean, it was the middle of summer. It was, 90 degrees at late at night. And this would have happened about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, is the best that we can guess. So it was still hot. So I always kind of thought that perhaps, it just didn't have a lot of hair at that time of the year, maybe. I can only speculate on that, but just red, and it scared the hell out of us. We didn't know what to do. We kind of debated over a period of just a few seconds of do we run, do we stay, do we try to chase it off, what's supposed to happen? But I don't think doing anything other than going home was an option at that point, and that's what we decided to do. We started heading back up the trail to the house, and it watched us until we couldn't see it anymore, until the lantern light left it.
Jesus, so it's actually holding its ground, watching you guys. I mean, it's going nowhere. Were you able to get a good look at the face, or can you give any descriptions on the face?
I could see we could see that the face was either black or gray, and I could tell that it had a big jaw, the pronounced jaw. And up until this point, my family are all full-blooded Comanche. There had been stories about these things. My grandmother wouldn't let us play outside of the yard after dark. There were certain places that, she would forbid us to go, especially at night. But we always thought it was just her trying to scare us. She would also tell us that there were escaped convicts in the woods and that we shouldn't be out there. So I never really believed in these things. I had seen the In Search Of episode, and I'd heard about Boggy Creek, but I had not watched Boggy Creek at that point. So we just saw a monster. I will say, though, that compared to Patty or compared to some of the other descriptions I've seen, it was much more chimp-like, I guess, than some of the other descriptions that you hear. It had more of a flat face, I guess you would say, and its body just seemed more chimp-like than some of the other pictures or drawings or Patty or anything else. It wasn't that type of body style. I guess you would say it was probably leaner and I guess meaner from everything that I've learned since then. So the hands I really couldn't see. The fingers were curled, and I couldn't see the feet because it was standing beside a pine tree, and there was some growth there around the feet, so I really couldn't see from the knees down. And when we decided to leave, we started backing our way up the trail, and we're pretty sure that it was following us at that point, that it waited until we couldn't see it anymore, or that it was out of the ring of light from the lantern, because we could hear it, and we could also hear something else moving alongside us. Nothing ever vocalized, nothing ever growled, nothing ever screamed, and maybe that was the scariest part about it, was because they were just, if there was more than one out there, they were completely stoic and completely silent, except for the movement. And like I said, it was a mile and a half back to the house. I still live in the same area today, actually. The trail that we had cut crossed a logging road. And when we got to the logging road, we knew that we were only about 300 or 400 yards from the house. So we started screaming for my father, like he would hear us at 2 or 3 a.m. Inside the house in the summer with the window unit, running in the old farmhouse. There was no way he was going to hear us. But I did have 2 Rhodesian Ridgeback dogs, and they did show up. They came down the trail barking. They didn't pursue these things. There was no fighting or anything like that. But once the dogs showed up, we just broke and ran as fast as we could. I guess they were kind of the sacrificial lamb as far as we were concerned. And when we got home and got into the house, I didn't expect to see them again, but they were out front the next morning, and they looked none the worse for wear. So I will say this: I did not go back to that section of the woods alone by myself. The next day, my dad and my uncle went out there with us. We didn't really find anything. The ground was hard during the summer, and all it really was the ground litter of just billions of dead pine needles. But we did find a big batch of turkey feathers from 2 or 3 turkeys that had been killed in that area. And I often thought that, maybe we were in the hunting spot. That was a place they like to frequent to hunt because turkeys often hung out there, and it was an open area. Not you've been to East Texas, it's thick. It's yopon holly and saw palmetto pretty much is anywhere that you go, and it's almost impenetrable.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it definitely is out there. It's an interesting encounter. Let me ask you this: how old were you when all this happened?
I would have been 16 or 17. I remember that I wasn't driving yet because I wanted to take the truck back down the road, and there was a gate on another piece of property that we could come through, and we could actually drive up there because Blaine and I didn't really want to walk in there. And I remember my dad telling me no, that I couldn't drive the truck on the main road because I didn't have a driver's license. So he and my uncle walked us in. And I expected ridicule from my father and my uncle, but we didn't get it. And I think back on it now and some other things that had happened before that in my life, and I think that my family, being there for so long, since 1860, that everybody knew that there had to be some truth to the stories, especially when my grandfather would talk about it, because he was never a man that would put more than 6 words together at one time. But if he talked about what local, it's basically Cajun and Comanche slang for anything bad in the woods is Rabboni, and he would talk about Rabboni. You know, don't go across the third cattle guard after dark, or Rabboni will get you. And so we always thought that it was just, okay, they just want us to stay at the house. They don't want us to do anything that we're not supposed to be doing. But I think back about it now, and obviously he's long past, but there were things that I wish I could ask him. And I think about incidents that happened when I was a kid. I was 12 years old, and I remember I was 12 years old because we did have a piece of property that had a rental house on it that my father rented to a family that had a boy that was my age. And it was at the end of our road, down by the main highway and down by the railroad track. So it was about 2 miles from my house. But he had called me and said that his uncle was coming over, and his uncle was a guy named Bubba. I don't know what this guy was into. I remember he had bullet holes in his Camaro, but he always had the coolest guns. He had an Uzi. He had an HK-91. He had always different kinds of guns, and he would let us shoot them. And so Bobby called me and said, hey, Bubba's coming. Do you want to come down and shoot guns? Well, I could take the road, the dirt road to get to his house, or I could cut through the woods. I could go outside my house, cross the barbed wire fence, and go down this trail, go through that area that we call the Enchanted Forest, cross the High Line, follow another trail through the woods, and I would end up next to the field that led up to the house. Well, I threw on some shorts, and I threw on my shoes, and I decided I would take the wood trail. It was a dark night. There wasn't a whole lot of light out. I did not have a flashlight, but I knew the trail so well that it was just muscle memory. Pretty much, I could walk it in the dark. And so I started running that trail, and I came into this same clear-cut area where we saw this creature years later, and someone was running next to me. 40 or 50 feet away in the dark, I could hear someone running. And I assumed that it was Bobby, that he had decided to meet me halfway. So I'm running along at almost full speed. And I'm, hey, what's up? You know, is Bubba at your house yet? And I got no answer back. And so I said, okay, well, he's kind of being a jerk. He wants to see if he can beat me back to his house. So I poured on the speed, and I ran down to the High Line. And at that point, there were two choices you could make. You could take a right and take the High Line back to the road, and it would lead you to his house, or you could stay on the trail through the woods and cross the fence and then run across the pasture and be at the back door of his house. Well, I decided I would peel right and take the road. So I peeled off to the right and ran. He ended up taking the other trail. So, okay, well, I'm going to beat him. So I ran as fast as I could. Ended up getting to the house. I'm breathing really hard. I'm covered in sweat. And I knocked on the door, and his mother had answered it. And I asked her, I said, hey, did I beat Bobby here? And she said, oh, Bobby's still in the bathtub. And I never knew what it was. It was out there running along beside me in the dark. And I have no way of knowing now, but it's things like that I look back on, and I just wonder, you know, back before they developed the area around us, I definitely think that some of the ones that may be living in the Sam Houston National Forest now or in the Little Lake Creek area probably used to frequent the area around our homestead, and they probably have been pushed out because George Mitchell sold the land and they cut timber out of there for 2 years. And now it's $1 million homes and golf courses. So, and talking to Bob Garrett and Tim Sermons, that was kind of the general consensus. It seems like these things are getting pushed into one central area, basically from the Sam Houston National Forest, over to Louisiana, out toward Caddo, because there's a lot of pretty much virgin timberland that's still there. So I found a timber wolf inside a creek feeder one time that had a locking hasp on it. every Sunday after church, it was my job to go around the place. Let's say we had 300 acres here, cattle ranch and hay farm. It was my job on Sundays to go out and put out feed into creek feeders for the cows. And basically, it's a big wooden box. It has a lid on the top that you open up, you pour the feed in, and the feed collects in a trough at the bottom. And as the cows eat the feed, more food drops out in the tray for them. Well, I went out one Sunday. I loaded up the pickup truck with hay and with feed, and I was going to put hay in the hay racks and feed in the creek feeders. And I opened up the top, and I got hit in the face with a bunch of blowflies and just this horrible stench. And typically, I could tap on the side of the thing and tell if it was full, if it was empty. So we didn't fill these things every week. Sometimes it may be a couple of weeks before we had to put feed back in. It just depended on how many cows were running on the property at the time. But there was, inside the box, there was what I thought was a dog at first. I thought maybe it was it looked like maybe a German Shepherd or something else. So I went home. I got my dad. My dad came back. He drug it out and put it on the ground, and he said no. He said this is a timber wolf. But Wes, it was like a bag of bones. It's like every bone in its body had been broken. And this feeder had a top, a wooden top that closed, and it had a hasp on it and you could lock, but the hasp was not locked. How many cows are going to, open the top of a feeder, and then the top of the feeder is about 8 feet high. That was something that that nobody could ever explain and that nobody ever really talked about. But we had creek feed out all the time. We had sorghum dispensers, basically these big troughs with kind of a water wheel mill in it that the cows would come up, and it was basically dispensing a syrup. We had things like range cubes and salt licks out as well. So, I kind of wondered, well, maybe these things are coming up and, in hindsight, maybe they were coming up and eating out of these feeders, and maybe it was some kind of gifting thing. I don't know, because we lost calves to wolves all the time. And I guess we probably lost calves to them sometimes too, but I never knew that at the time. I had no way of knowing. There was another instance where we had a cow that died, and what we would normally do is we would take the cow down to the back pasture, drag the cow onto some fence posts and railroad cross ties and old tires if we had them, and say this is the late 70s, early 80s, and set them on fire. Well, this particular cow died when it was raining really hard, so we couldn't barn her. So we drug the carcass down to the back pasture, which was next to the woods. Drug her up onto the cross ties, and I asked my grandfather. I said, "Well, should I go ahead and soak everything down with kerosene or diesel oil, or not?" He said, "No, don't worry about it." He said, "You don't need that." And so we went back to the house. Going to come back the next morning and start the fire, and we came back and the cow was gone. And like I said, at this time I was probably 9 or 10 years old. But I remember my dad and my uncle just kind of looking at each other and just nothing was said. So I don't know. I never knew what to think, and I still don't know what to think, but it makes me wonder sometimes.
Yeah, it does make you wonder. It makes you wonder, dead cows don't get up and walk off on their own. And if it would have been a predator, it would have, torn it apart right there. You would have been able to tell right away, okay, this is a predator that came in to feed on the dead cow. But for it to just get up and walk away, that's interesting. I wanted to ask you, you said that your brother's name was Blaine, or the
Blaine, yeah, he was. I called him my brother, but he was just a good friend and a friend of the family.
Did he say why originally that thing caught his attention when you guys were camping? Did he say what actually caught his attention of it watching you guys?
He told me that it was just the smell. I don't recall smelling the smell. I've smelled it since with Tim Sermons, but I did not smell anything that night, and I don't really remember what the wind was doing. But in Texas in high summer, you can pretty much figure that it was pretty still. But he may have, I guess he just got a whiff of it. But I didn't smell anything that night. But I know everybody talks about the skunk mixed with the wet dog and rotting meat or something like that, and sometimes ammonia, an ammonia type smell mixed in with all that. I've smelled it since then, but I didn't smell it that night. But I asked him, did it growl? Did it make a noise? Because everything that I witnessed, it didn't do anything except look at us. But it wasn't, and I'll say I didn't get a good feeling from it that night at all. And Bob Garrett will tell you that he believes that they were looking for an opportunity to take one of us.
Really, in that situation, it would almost make you feel better if it growled, as odd as that sounds, or made some sort of vocalizations. But just standing there watching you guys, holding its ground, not moving, almost makes you more unnerved because you don't really know what it's going to do. It's not giving you any sort of. It's kind of like poker with these things. You don't know what it's going to do. It's very unpredictable. And Waylon, I wanted to ask you. I told Tim to take you to some of the areas those guys took me. And everyone has their opinion on Bob Garrett and Tim Sermons and all those guys. And I'm telling you, I've been out with these guys. These guys know they're not. How do I say this? I've never been out with a group of people and been brought into areas where there's constant something is going on, whether it's vocalizations or nonstop things going on. And these guys just know areas to take you to. So I was telling Tim, hey, take Waylon to where you guys took me, where Bob and I had the log thrown at us. And you have kind of a unique job. I'd kill to trade jobs with you. But you have a very cool job where you're utilizing drone technology. You're flying these drones. You have expensive cameras on these drones. And do you want to talk a little bit about that? Maybe talk about the areas where Tim took you. And I know you guys saw a gray one when you guys were driving down the road, or you saw something gray in the bushes.
It was white.
Or white, I'm sorry.
It was so white that we couldn't help but actually see it. And we spent a lot of time trying to make sure that this wasn't, the inside of a deer's thigh or the underside of a deer or the tail or anything else, but using everything that we both know about the woods. Like I say, I spent 16 years in the Marine Corps. I was a cold weather survival instructor at the Marine Corps Mountain Warfare Training Center in Bridgeport, California. So I'd been in what was supposed to be Bigfoot Central, and I'd always kept my eyes open for these things in the Sierras, but I never saw one while I was in California. But when I came back here, I did have a sighting in 2005 just for a few seconds in the Sam Houston. That really piqued my interest. And when I started listening to the show and hearing about Bob and Tim, you actually put me in touch with Tim Sermons, and that's how all this got started. But as I got late in my Marine Corps career, I left the infantry after I saw my first Puma and my first Predator, which they now call the Reaper. So I have experience with drones on the military side. I'm a commercial pilot now, but we utilize drones in the oil and gas industry. So, and this isn't the first time someone has done this. I've seen folks on newscasts that have Sasquatch sightings, flying their little drones. I've actually seen the Finding Bigfoot episode where they put the RC Nitro helicopter into the air. I'm familiar with the Falcon Project as well. What I bring to the table is basically experience of having 20,000 hours flying these things, and just knowledge of the cameras and the equipment. It's not the drone that makes anything that we're doing special. Honestly, the drone is just a taxi for the sophisticated camera equipment that we plan on utilizing. You have multispectral systems right now, hyperspectral systems beyond visible light. I can use them, or I do use them on a daily basis in my career. I can detect a gas leak under 16 feet of earth and under 40 feet of water. There's really just no place to hide from a hyperspectral, multispectral system, but they're expensive. You're looking into the, close to $100,000, depending. So if you're not well connected or well funded or have access to some of these systems, nobody's just been able to do this before for any extended period of time. And that's just one of the things that I've been wanting to do it myself for a long time, but I needed to know where they were, knowing how dangerous they can be here. I wanted someone watching my back while I had my head buried in this equipment. And Bob and Tim and their group have offered to do that for me. So I pretty much put myself at their disposal. And also it gives me an opportunity to learn what I can about these things from what Bob knows and what the other members of the team know. But I would trust any of those guys and have trusted those guys to watch my back. And I watch theirs also. So yeah, we're to say the areas that they took me to definitely are active. I can say that and let me say this, I don't know if we will ever, I don't believe that any video will ever be definitive proof. For a true skeptic, I don't think so. I think I could have HD 4K video shot on a Red Epic camera with George Lucas as the director, and I don't think anybody would buy it, even if it was a Sasquatch throwing Ford Focuses, off of the overpass of the Loop in downtown Dallas. I just don't think they would. They would have the red pins out in no time. But what the tool does is it gives you confirmation that you're in the right area. The same as a footprint or an impression casting. The same as something that you would see on a game camera. So it can give you an idea if you are in an area where they might be. I don't think the ones in this part of Texas are too concerned with aircraft. I think they're used to seeing aircraft flying over. So I see it as a 400-foot tripod to carry sophisticated camera gear into the air with. And, I'm not talking about the multi-copter that you buy at Fry's or Best Buy or something like that. These are custom made, custom built, custom manufactured, and they're built to my specifications. So it's basically military grade hardware. I think it's going to help us get onto one of these things and get into the right area, where at least you're not wasting your time. If you pick one up on a hyperspectral system or a very expensive FLIR system that happens to be airborne, it lets you know you're in the right spot. You can start doing some other things that may be ground-based, with ground cameras. Or there's also LiDAR, airborne LiDAR systems that I use for geomapping that pretty much it'll map every leaf on every tree. So there's just not a lot of places where these things can hide. But like I say, I don't think that proof, world-changing proof, is ever going to be obtained through any piece of video. I think it just is a tool for researchers to use to let them know that they're in the right place.
I agree with you. I don't think a photo or a video is going to prove anything. You know, you could be up in the air and you could videotape one of these things walking. You could videotape one of these things eating. You could videotape. And at the end of the day, I don't think it's really going to prove anything to anyone. It could be a great video. And most people, 50% of the people say it's a hoax. The other 50% will say it's a bear. And so it's not going to prove anything. But I like the idea. And I like the system that you have set up, especially in those areas where those guys are at. I'm hoping one day that someone will shoot one and, take its head off and bring it in and show the world if they can get past all the other obstacles. But I'm hoping that actually does happen. As cruel as that sounds, as terrible as that sounds, as much as I love animals, I really hate to see something like that happen, but I think it needs to be done. But I love the idea of the drone flying around, being used as a tool, especially in some of the areas those guys will take you, because they're in those areas. I know that one area that you and I were talking about, Waylon, I told you across from that area. I'm trying to think of how to word it, because I know the guys don't want me to give away the locations, but you know the area I'm talking about. Right across from that area where that bridge is at, there's a farmer that lives over there, and it's a big, huge piece of property. I know for a fact that guy was doing pop shots at these things, because we'd hear gunfire at like 2 a.m. coming from his property, almost like he was taking pop shots. So it'd be kind of interesting. I know as I looked, and I hate to be so vague for the audience, and I apologize, but as you look at that area, my first thought was, I wonder where they're bedding down at. You know what I mean?
And that's it. And here's one of the other beautiful things is, as a pilot, I know that I can't fly below 2,000 feet in a fixed-wing or rotary-wing full-scale aircraft. But the drones can actually fly that because they're quiet. You can't hear it at 400 feet. So if you do happen to catch one with their pants down out in the open, it's not really bothering them that much. And I don't feel that it's disturbing the other wildlife in any way, which is a good thing. But that area that you were talking about, I think that bridge is probably used quite a bit for those things to cross the road. I mean, why would you cross a Forest Service road when you can just take walk through the culvert under the bridge and stay? And I think that creek system there is definitely a highway for them to get into the deep backwoods, but then to come up to the farm or the other places there. And I say that's a homestead, inside of a national nature preserve. So if these things are as opportunistic as we believe that they are, they would be foolish not to take advantage of whatever he has to offer, whether it's calves or chickens or something like that. So I found this with my own people here, the East Texas hillbillies, basically, which I definitely am one. It's like you say, there are people all over this country that have just learned to tolerate these things, and they tolerate each other, and 90% of the time, everything's fine. It just seems like there's something going on here in the last few years where the balance has changed and things have changed.
I agree with you. I think, like you and I were just saying, in that situation, I think they're so crammed into that area. Like I said, we'd be out there late at night, and around 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, you'd hear gunshots going off from this guy's property. And coincidentally, it was about the time you heard the vocals. It was about the time activity was picking up. And I really, really wanted to go and talk to this guy. I know Bob said, well, probably best if you don't, but you can go talk to him if you want. But every single night we were there, you would hear him pop off a couple shots right when activity would pick up. So you wonder what's going on over there. I wanted to ask you, back in 2005, do you want to tell us about that encounter?
Well, that was, I will say I joined the Marine Corps at 20. I won't say that I was afraid of the woods after that night in the late 80s or 85, 86 when we encountered this thing. But I was a lot more careful, and I was to some degree afraid to be out there by myself because I started thinking about all the other things, weird things that had taken place around here through my childhood and growing up. And I joined the Marine Corps because it may sound stupid, but I decided that I was going to be in the woods. I wanted to be at least the second meanest thing out there. So I joined the Marine Corps. I joined the infantry. It was basically a scout skier, Arctic infantry, cold weather infantry. And ended up at Bridgeport at the Mountain Warfare Training Center. I taught the assault climbers course. I taught the cold weather survival course, which kicked off at about 10,000 feet, and over the course of a couple of weeks ended up at around 14,000 feet. Just teaching Marines and to survive in those conditions, sleeping in snow caves and things like that. During the mountain warfare course, at times I would be out there for 2 or 3 days on my own with the radio. We did scout sniper training there also. I do not have a hog's tooth, but I did teach a lot of the Marine Corps scout snipers that had come out of Camp Pendleton or had come out of Stone Bay at Camp Lejeune. I helped them hone their skills as far as surviving in a harsh environment that was also a enemy hostile environment, keeping their camouflage up, building a hide for long duration surveillance and things like that. So I'd be out there for a couple of days on my own going to check on these guys. And I never saw one, never had any real thought after that. I'm like, okay, well, I thought these things were supposed to be in California mainly, so I guess the ones in Texas must be different. And I started to think that maybe that I had just taken the whole situation wrong, and I ended up as a flute player for several years. I saw Kill Bill in my spare time. I would make bamboo side blown Marshall flutes. I would take my flute out of the woods, the jarhead sitting out in the woods with my flute, and I would play, and I would cold camp in the Sam Houston National Forest, which I look back on now as being really brazen, and never really had anything happen until I took my dog for a walk. I deployed to Iraq. I came back in early 2005. It was right around Christmas. Just had a lot of testosterone going, and just kind of needed to get away from everybody. So I took my dog one day and I went into the Sam Houston, following the Lone Star Trail up to Kelly's Pond, from where the Lone Star Trail comes off of FM 249. And I was probably a half mile from Kelly's Pond, and I came through a creek. And when I stepped into the bottom of the creek, I looked up on the opposite creek bank, and there was a face looking at me. I didn't see it for long. It was a dark gray, and it turned its body. It looked back behind it where I couldn't see on the other side of the rise. It turned, it looked back at me, it turned, and then it went the direction that it looked where I couldn't see. So I don't know if maybe somebody was at the campground that it was more interested in or what. I don't know. I did not follow it, though. I picked up my little fox terrier, and I did the, turning every 10 steps rear security walk all the way back to the truck and came home. But the look that I got, even though, was just looking into those dark brown eyes for just a split second, there was no way that I could feel good about it. And that's when I really started doing my reading and research and found out that the ones out down here are just different. That we are probably on the menu, probably not as much as we could be, but probably more often than we think we are. And from what I've learned, and then in the past few months, learning everything I can from Bob and the other guys, the other researchers that are in this part of Texas and the South doing research, pretty much most of the time they're going to be hostile. They're either going to get you out of there or they're going to take you out, even if you make yourself a really easy, vulnerable, convenient target. So my flute player days ended at that point out of personal experience because in the 2 times that I had encountered these things face-to-face, even though the first encounter probably lasted a grand total of maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and just a few seconds on the second one, just I would say, I call it a glimpse for the most part, but there was no way to misidentify what this was. There's just not. And anyone that's ever been face-to-face with one, when people say that, it was a bear, okay, there hasn't been a bear here in 100 years. There just hasn't. Not even black bears or sugar bears. I've lived here for 45 years and I've never seen a bear in the wild, ever, in Texas. I've seen them in Canada and Alaska, but never here. But at that point, my outlook changed, and I realized that it is an apex predator. It's not the friendly forest vegetarian giant. Not what I have experienced anyway.
So you walk up on this thing, and you're kind of looking at its face. I realize it's just kind of a glimpse, but for the audience, can you describe it at all? Can you talk about what you saw?
It was very much like the first one, except for the color. The only thing that at this time I was actually able to see the eyes. I could see they were deep, they were dark. I'm assuming they were probably dark brown. They looked maybe like they were black, but I would imagine they were probably actually dark brown, which a lot of primates have dark brown eyes. I don't know of any light-colored ones as far as I could tell. But I saw the side profile, and pretty much what I saw was the head and the shoulders turning. I couldn't see anything below the elbows. I couldn't see the hands or anything else. It was, let's say, the way that it was standing on the hill. It was standing on the back side of the hill, so all I could see was what was above the top of the hill. And I don't know if it was waiting for something else to come down, maybe, that it could jump on that was coming down the trail or coming down the creek. I don't know. But I definitely felt like, in that second that I definitely could have been on the menu if it had wanted me, it would have taken me. But it ended up going the other direction back toward the campground, and I didn't follow it. And I know that's a really active area. I know the BFRO has gone in there a few times as well. Really strange incident. But yeah, it was the same gray face. The hair came up to the cheekbones. Pretty much the skin that you could see or that I could see was on the nose and around the eyes. I didn't see any ears or anything else, but it was that dark grayish, bluish skin tone. And I'll say this one was definitely dark gray. He was, I don't know if you ever look at like a white oak tree or something like that. They're not actually white, they're gray. And kind of, especially like an older weathered one, it actually gets some black mixed in with it. So it's just a really dark slate gray color. And that was him. And it was an overcast day. It was cold. It was the week before Christmas. So there was nobody else out there. Hunting season is still open then, but again, this wasn't a person. I'd spent my life around guys with rifles in ghillie suits. I know I spent enough time in a ghillie suit training students myself to be able to recognize one, even without any defilade or camouflage on it. So that did it for me at that point. I kind of I go out there a little more defensively now. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's one of those things when you see it, it's, like you said, it's not a guy in a suit. It's not a ghillie suit. It's not a bear. Most people that see something like that right away know they're seeing something special. They're seeing something different. They're seeing something unknown to general science.
Yeah, exactly.
But God, I would love to trade places with you. You can come host the show, and I'll come fly the planes, and I would trade places with you in a heartbeat. I think, especially out there, I really think that you guys are going to get something flying around. But at the end of the day, what do you do with it? What do you? And I've seen your camera system. It's impressive. Even at 2,000 feet, you can get almost right down to the ground floor flying, and it's beautiful footage that you can get. Honestly, it's just a matter of time before someone comes forward with footage like that, whether it's commercial or whether it's their own personal drone they're flying around. It's just a matter of time before we start to see better and better and better footage. When you're in the air looking down and you see a Sasquatch, you tend not to freak out. But when you're holding a camera and you're 70 feet away from one, people freak out. And so I think we will end up getting some good footage, and I wish you guys the best out there. I can't think of a better group of guys to go out with than Bob, Tim, and all those guys, Mo, all those guys. And
you're welcome. I enjoy being able to say you're welcome to come down anytime and see what we're doing. Like I say, we're not the first people that have done this, but we're trying to take it to the next level with some of the technology that I have access to. And things like sense and avoid technology are coming. We're actually testing some sense and avoid equipment now with drones that can fly through the woods at 30 miles an hour, dodging tree branches and dodging trees and things like that. That's what's coming down the pike. So we're just going to try to put all this technology to use and see if it helps in the search.
The next great footage, the next Patterson-Gimlin type footage, is probably going to come from a drone.
Yeah, and I would encourage, people that are out there. You have to be careful when you do this. Having a lot of experience definitely helps. But hey, if you know a spot where you think they are, they can. They're welcome to contact one of us through you, and we'd be happy to come out there and take a bird's eye view for them. And at least see. And that's one of the beautiful benefits is being able to see everything. I will say this, Google Earth has a resolution. I can go well beyond what Google Earth's resolution power is. So it helps you find where they may be hanging out, like you say, where they may be bedding down, possible food sources, trackways. And that's the real beauty of it. If we get lucky enough to get one on film that just happens to be in the open, then hey, that's icing on the cake for us. And so we're like everybody else. We don't think that the footage is going to do the trick, but it's just another tool.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Well, I'll be down in Texas soon. I can't give you any dates, but I'll be making another trip down there soon. And I'll be down with Bob and Tim, and I can't wait to meet you, Waylon, and see your whole setup and watch that bird fly and see what we can get. And I wish you guys the best in the meantime. And I really, I thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your encounters and your experiences. And I just think about that one standing there watching you that didn't vocalize, didn't do anything, was just kind of giving you guys a stink eye the whole time. It's just weird behavior, you know what I mean? It's just strange.
And I think that's why, Bob said that, that goes beyond the behavior of we want to run you out of the area. This is, what are you going to do? Is there a chance for me to grab one of your kids? That was, I say when a bear comes into your camp at night, you've got a problem because it's in predatory mode.
Yeah, you're right.
If it comes into your camp and doesn't go for your food at night, you've got a problem. And I think this was probably kind of the same thing. It was trying to slip up on us, and it got busted. and maybe it didn't know what to do, so it just stood there and did nothing. Or maybe, and I will say this, I got the feeling that it was looking past us the whole time. I never got the feeling that it was looking directly at us, trying to make eye contact with us. And he and I both felt that it was looking beyond where we were. And that's what really sends the chills down my spine even now, is who else was out there, you know. And then once I realized, learning from Bob that it probably wasn't a juvenile, that in this part of the world that 6.5 feet is pretty much full grown, mature. And I'm assuming it was a male. I didn't see any breasts or anything else. That it probably meant business, especially if we were hanging out in a spot that it was used to feeding in. We were just something new to eat in the area, you know. I don't know. One thing I want to say before I hang up, because I know that some folks say, I spent my life as a child playing out in the woods during the day, building forts, building tree houses by myself all the time. I think back, I would hear tree knocks, and I would wonder, who's building something out in the middle of the woods? And I would only hear like 3 or 4. Oh, well, maybe it's a deer hunter building a tree stand. And you would hear vocalizations, just these one-word vocalizations. Never heard screams or anything. If they wanted to take me as a kid, if they were around, they could have, and they never did. So I don't think these things actively hunt people all the time, but I think there are times when they do because they need to, or they feel compelled to, or maybe they just had a bad day. Maybe they're territorial. Who knows? But yeah, I don't think that they were stalking me my whole childhood, because there are plenty of times they could have had me if they wanted. So I wanted to say that before we ended the conversation, because I don't think that they're out there actively trying to kill people all the time, but I think that you can definitely be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and bad things can happen if you're an easy target.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with you. I mean, I don't think they are necessarily actively looking to take someone, but, in the same breath, like a black bear. Does a black bear actively try to attack you, or does a cougar? Your chances of really being stalked and attacked by a cougar are pretty slim. But if the situation's right, both of those two animals will attack you. Both those two animals will go after you. And I think you're right. I think they're opportunistic. I think the situation has to be right. You have to be an easy target, and they have to be in the position of wanting to take you. But generally, are they out just snagging people left and right, eating them? I don't think so. Does that go on?
I don't think so either.
Yeah, but does that go on? Absolutely, it goes on. I think there's no doubt in my mind that goes on. But is it something that happens all the time? I don't think it happens all the time, but I think it does happen.
Exactly.
And I think they can turn on you. And I always tell people, treat it like a grizzly bear. You never know what a grizzly bear is going to do. It might be having a bad day, and if it decides it wants you, you're in bad shape. You're in bad shape.
Exactly. I really enjoyed. I appreciate you talking with me. Definitely, and I love what you guys do on the show, and I love the forums, and I was a member for a while on the old Bigfoot forums, and really appreciate having another outlet, or a better outlet, I should say, for people that are really into this subject. So.
No, I appreciate you coming on, and when I get down to Texas, I can't wait to meet you and go out with you guys, and I just would love to see the whole drone thing in action. So thank you again, Waylon. Thank you for being on, and thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you, and we'll try to have some new toys for you the next time you come down.
Sounds good.
All right, take care, Wes.
And that's it for tonight, everyone. Remember, if you've had an encounter you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email, wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. Come back on Sunday. We'll be talking to a guest from South Carolina who had a couple strange encounters, including his ATV that was tipped over and having rocks thrown at him, screamed at. He actually did have a visual sighting, but he had a lot of strange encounters prior to his visual. So look for that on Sunday. I'm also going to be welcoming Trevor from the Pacific Northwest, who came across some tracks. I know we ran out of time tonight, but Trevor's got an interesting story, and I'll post all of his photos on the website this weekend. But Trevor's got an interesting story about these tracks he found. He measured how big they were. And what's interesting is Trevor's not really into Bigfoot. He's more into photography. And he found these tracks, so he wanted to share them. So look for that on Sunday. Until next time, everyone, have a great night. Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you this evening. I've been out filming most of the day. I hope everyone got a chance to check out the introduction to the Pacific Northwest. For those of you who live here in Washington, it's probably no big deal. You've seen it a million times. But for those who don't live here, I hope you get an appreciation for how vast the area is out here. And it's been cold. I mean, really, really cold. At night, it's been getting down to the 20s. So wherever you are, wherever you're listening to this, I hope you're nice and warm and nice and toasty warm, because it's cold here. Like I said, been out most of the day filming, and we're putting together some more videos for the members. And then tonight, we're going to go out and do a night investigation. I came back into town to do the show for you guys, and then I'm packing back up and I'm heading back out, and I'm hoping to get some good stuff for you guys. So I hope you enjoyed the video of the introduction to the Pacific Northwest. I really hope that you guys got a chance to check it out. Just for those who don't live here, maybe it gives you an idea of how vast the area is. If you've had an encounter, shoot me an email, wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. Well, I want to jump into it tonight. Chris, welcome to the show. I know you're from South Carolina, and you had a very interesting encounter, kind of a terrifying encounter, actually. But thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here as well.
Now, if you would, you had a pretty interesting encounter out there in South Carolina, and it was kind of a terrifying night. If you would, kind of start from the beginning. Just kind of tell the audience what you were out doing, and I'll give you the mic. You tell us what happened, man.
Yeah, no problem. Basically, my buddy and I were going on a kayaking trip. It's on the Chattooga River in South Carolina. It's kind of the Chattooga River borders South Carolina and Georgia. So one side is South Carolina, the other one is Georgia. Excuse me for my voice right now. I kind of have a cold. But we went down there on a trip. I live about 3.5 hours away from this area. And this was about 3 years ago. Like I said, we were going on a kayaking trip. You know, we had pre-planned this whole ordeal to go. And we drove up there, and we had kind of planned on, you know, just getting up there, setting up really fast, because my friend and I both had to work that afternoon. So we got up there kind of late. By the time that we had gotten up there, it was almost dark. And when we got there, it had been raining all day long. It rained the whole entire time that we were on the way up to the mountains. When we got up there, we set up our tent really quick and proceeded to get a bunch of firewood together, because we were planning on cooking our dinner over the fire. What I usually do is when I go up the mountain, I'm kind of lazy. So I take frozen burritos, kind of wrap them in aluminum foil, and just kind of toss them in the campfire. And it's just a really easy dinner.
I laugh because I do the same thing. I laugh because I do the same thing.
It's so easy, man. You just take the burritos, wrap them up, and just toss them in the fire, and then they're done in, 10 minutes. And they're actually really delicious. But anyway, so we were trying to get our campfire together, to do that. And we gathered a lot of wood, but when we tried to get the fire lit, it just would not light. The wood was really wet. And it started to mist on us really bad in the middle of all this, trying to get that going. Anyway, so the fire wouldn't light up. So we're sitting there, we're continuing to fight with this thing, trying to get the fire to light. And out of nowhere, basically, let me describe the area really quick. It was at Woodall Shoals on the Chattooga River. This is where Deliverance was filmed at. It's about a 5-mile drive off the main road down into this area, and there's a little cul-de-sac with a little, like, not a bathhouse, like a porta potty kind of thing that they have set up there. And there's a trail that goes down about, I don't know, 500 yards to a campsite. And there are a couple campsites that people camp at. During the summertime, it's really busy because there's a lot of people up there on the river. During this time of the year, when we went, there was no one else there except for us. We got down in there, and we were trying, like I said, we were trying to get the fire started, and it just wouldn't happen. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, something started coming down the mountainside from in front of us. It's kind of a steep embankment. I don't know what kind of angle it was, probably a 35, 40 degree angle coming down this mountain. Branches just started snapping. I mean, this thing came down, just charging down towards us. And it really took us by surprise because, this was the last thing we expected to happen to us. So it comes down, and I looked at my friend and I said, what in the hell is going on? And all of a sudden, it just stops. And it starts growling at us. So I look at my friend and we both looked towards the direction. But like I said, we had no fire. All we had was small headlamps. And with the mist, the way that it was coming down at that point, you literally could not see 5 feet in front of you. So we're looking in that direction of the noise that had happened, and rocks started getting thrown at us. So we're sitting there, and we were actually sitting on top of a picnic table. At this point, there's a picnic table somebody had brought down there years ago. It's an old picnic table. We're sitting on this thing, and rocks were getting thrown right at our feet. Now we're getting really worried about what's going on. My buddy had a gun on him. It was in his bag. He went and grabbed it and stood there while we, were trying to assess the situation, what was going on. And like I said, this area that we were in is where Deliverance was filmed. And if anybody's ever seen Deliverance, I'm sure you've seen the whole story with, I want to hear you squeal like a pig and stuff like that. I mean, there's rednecks up there. I mean, I didn't know if there was, somebody trying to mess with us, but the thing is that what really messed with me was the sound of the branches that it made as it crashed down through, down that mountainside. I mean, it wasn't small branches. The branches that were breaking off were probably about the size of my arm. And as they broke, as this thing came down the hillside, I mean, I couldn't imagine, I couldn't picture what could be breaking these branches off coming down through there. I mean, it really sounded like a bulldozer was coming down through that hillside. So I got really scared. My buddy got really scared. He ran to the tent and grabbed his bag, grabbed his gun, and we sat there. And like I said, this thing kept throwing rocks. It continued to throw rocks at us basically the whole entire night. And we had gotten there probably, I don't know, 6:30, somewhere around there. And, the time hadn't completely changed at this point yet, but it was right at the point where it was about to. So it was just about to get dark. And, like I said, we couldn't really see anything. So just the whole experience in general, with it being dark like it was, we couldn't see up the hill, that we couldn't get our fire started, this thing's throwing rocks at us, and we had no idea what was happening. Just to, let people know, this is like I said, 5 miles off of a main road, way down into a national park. And this is, they cannot have houses, any kind of structures built within 1 mile of each side of this river. So there is nothing back in those woods at all. And people, you just don't see people back in there, like walking around or anything. I mean, unless they're kayakers. for somebody to be back there in those woods, you know, making a big ordeal like that, messing with us, I mean, it's obsolete. I mean, there's no way that could have happened.
What's going through your mind at this point? You guys are sitting there. You're in the dark now, or it's starting to get dark. You guys are getting rocks thrown at you. You hear what sounds like it's just breaking these huge branches as it's coming around you. What's going through your mind? I mean, are you and your friend talking at this point? I mean, is it...
To be honest with you, I had no clue. I mean, Bigfoot was like the last thing on my mind. I had never even thought twice about Bigfoot. I never even paid it any attention. Anytime I saw it on TV, I would change the channel. I thought it was a big hoax, a big joke. Even when this whole thing was happening, that never even crossed my mind. To be honest with you, I didn't really know what was going on. I've spent a lot of time up in those mountains. I've seen black bear up there, and, you know, I've seen them and I've encountered them. I've walked up on them and they've ran away from me. That was one of the first things that came to mind, was maybe it was a bear. But the way that the branches were breaking on the trees, I was really confused, to be honest with you. I really didn't know. The branches that were breaking the trees had to be about the size of my arm. They were breaking off. I mean, they sounded like gunfire when they were going off. I mean, just breaking. And then when the rock throwing started happening, to be honest with you, I really had no idea. I just did not know what was going on. I was really just scared for my life, to be honest with you.
So this starts up. It starts throwing rocks, and you and I both know. You and I are kind of country boys who've been out in the woods. We realize there's unless you believe in Bigfoot, or if you don't, there's only one thing that throws rocks. It's humans, or if you believe in Sasquatch, it's obviously Sasquatch. And I think for the audience out there, it's important to understand it when you're listening to Chris, and Chris knows this, I don't have to sell him on this. You don't go out there and start causing a ruckus like that, throwing rocks at guys in a camp, because you might get yourself shot. What happened next? So the sun's starting to go down. Was the rocks coming from different directions? Was it mainly coming from one main direction?
No, it was mainly coming from one direction. It was coming from, because basically we were in like a micro valley. We were kind of up on the side of the mountain. It's probably about a mile walk, maybe half-mile walk. I'm not really sure how far down, but this is a main entrance to the put-in for the Section 4 on the Chattooga River. I didn't really know what was going on. I mean, I really was just really confused. I mean, like I said, during the summertime, there's a lot of people staying in this area. I mean, a lot of people camp there because there's a lot of rafters and stuff that come through there. But this one particular time, I came up there and there was nobody there. To be honest with you, I don't even know what I was thinking. I mean, I was really confused. And I really didn't even really put two and two together until later on, after I really started, you know, telling some of my friends the story that happened and doing a little bit of research, that I said, this wasn't a human being, and this had to be Sasquatch. I mean, there was no other option that it could have been.
And so what happens next? It's starting to throw rocks. It's getting dark. What happens next?
Well, it started throwing rocks at us. It started growling at us. It started grunting at us. There's like I said, there's an old picnic table that somebody had put down there years ago, and we were sitting on the picnic table. And like I said, we had tried to get the fire started, but we couldn't get it started. So we're sitting in basically pitch black dark. We had our little flashlights, but the mist was so thick that you just could not see in front of you. So we're trying to shine our flashlights up there to see what this is. We couldn't see anything, and this continued for hours. I mean, whatever this was, it kept moving around the campsite. Like I said, we were sitting down in this little valley, and there's a mountainside up in front of us, and I heard whatever this creature was like running back and forth real fast. And basically, there's one trail that leads down from that cul-de-sac parking lot that we were parked at down to the campsite. And I looked at my friend and I said, I think we need to get out of here. And he agreed with me. And we got up to leave. We were just going to leave our camp gear there and just get in this car and go. And when we started to proceed back up the trail, it darted over towards where we were at, and we backed off. and went back down to where we were at. We could not leave. It basically had us trapped in this little area and would not let us leave or do anything. So basically we were just terrorized by this thing the whole entire night. It just continued and continued and continued for hours and hours. I mean, this probably started around 7:30 in the afternoon and went on until about 3 o'clock in the morning until it finally stopped. And my buddy and I both went in the tent, and my buddy had his gun on him, and he slept with the gun on his chest. And so we woke up the next morning. As soon as the daylight came up, we got up and we got our stuff together and we left. And I've never been back to the same place ever again.
I don't blame you one bit. These type of encounters to me is almost more terrifying than if you actually see it, because if you can't see it and you're being terrorized by it, I can't imagine laying in that tent or being around that little camp area without a fire and you got one gun and you're kind of hoping for the best. A lot of people say, well, why didn't you start shooting? I mean, I can already hear the audience saying that. Well, in that situation, and you can answer it, Chris, but I guess I'll answer it too. In that situation, you don't start blasting off unless you know, A, what you're shooting at. It's just crazy to start blasting off shots. You know, unless you're a maniac, to start blasting off shots. What did you and your buddy talk about on the way out of there?
To be honest with you, we didn't talk about it at all. We, like I said, we went up there to go kayaking. And that was the first time we got there because we both had to work that day. And we drove up there after we got off work. So like I said, we got there kind of late in the afternoon. We got out that morning, we packed our stuff up, and we went and got on the river the next day. We got off the river and we drove home. We didn't really discuss it. I mean, as weird as it sounds, we really didn't talk about it until later. And like I told you yesterday when we were discussing this before, you know, we came back, we kind of discussed it a little bit. You know, as crazy as it sounds, I'm being completely honest, we did not discuss it. And we came back and, you know, we were so confused by the whole situation. And we kind of told my buddy's wife about the situation. She kind of laughed us off. I told my wife the situation with my buddy. And my buddy is, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I joke around a lot. I play a lot of pranks on people and stuff like that. So my wife probably thought, you know, maybe I was joking around with this whole ordeal. But my buddy is a straight shooter. He doesn't exaggerate, you know, stories or anything like that. You know, he is a country guy. He'll tell you exactly the way it is. And he told his wife the story, and she completely blew him off. And, you know, I told her the story as well. People have laughed us off like this is some kind of joke, and it's not a joke. I mean, like I told you yesterday, you know, I used to go up in those mountains, and because I would drive up there. I lived 3.5 hours, 4 hours away from there. I would drive up there and go kayaking during the day, and it's such a long drive home after kayaking all day. I would just throw a single tent up and sleep out there by myself. And there's multiple nights that I would just make a campfire and throw my sleeping bag right beside the fire and go to sleep and wake up the next morning and drive home. And since this incident happened, I have never, ever been back up there again. I've never stayed up there again. Now, I've kayaked that river, but I've never stayed there since this incident happened. And my wife, you know, after she made fun of me at first, I mean, because my wife really thought it was some kind of joke or something, like I was playing around about this. And, you know, like I said, you know, before, I never thought Bigfoot was real. It wasn't even a thought in my mind. I never once have read a Bigfoot book, watched a Bigfoot story on TV. If there was one on, I would change the channel because I just never believed in this. After everything happened, and I told my wife the story and everything like that, and, you know, she heard my story, and now she sees, because my wife knew how avid of a kayaker I was. I mean, this was my release. I used to go up there all the time. I would get off work on a Sunday night at, 11 o'clock at night, and I had my stuff packed up, and I would drive to the mountains just to get away from everything. And my wife knows now that I'm serious. I won't go back there again. I'm too afraid. And, you know, like I told you yesterday, you know, I was in the Boy Scouts growing up. My father took us camping, you know, my whole childhood. When I was growing up, we lived up, you know, backed up against like 5,000 acres. And my brother and I would just, you know, on a Friday afternoon after school, we would pack our bags and just go off into the woods and go camping. I don't feel like I can do that anymore because of what happened that one time. I'm too afraid to go out in the woods. I'm just scared. I don't know what's out there. I've never experienced anything like that before.
Yeah, it does change your perspective when something like this happens on what's out there. I wanted to ask you a quick question about the grunting and the growling. What would you compare it to? When you heard was it constantly grunting and growling? Was it intermediate? And can you kind of describe, what would you compare the growling to?
It wasn't like a dog or anything. The only way I can describe it is for me to make the noise. It was just like, like that. It had a really low growl. It just, after it would do that, it was just like that. I mean, that's the only way I can describe it. There's no way for me to put it into words, you know, what it felt like for this thing to be sitting, you know, 30 yards in front of me, making these noises, and I couldn't see what was in front of me. It didn't make any howls or anything like that. You know, I've heard on your show about people's, you know, have heard the howls and stuff. I didn't hear any of that. It just had a really low grunt. And I mean, the only way I could really say it sounded like a gorilla would make it, like a grunt.
Yeah, and that's interesting. That's what I was curious about was the type of noise that you heard. You know, and in that situation, as you and I talked the other night, Chris, I was telling you, it's fascinating to listen to these types of encounters when you don't actually see it. You know, I had a guy on one time, I told you this and I'll tell the audience. I had a guy on one time, he had a similar deal where he never saw it, did the same thing, threw rocks at him, grunted, growled, circled the camp, circled, threw rocks, grunted, growled, and he ended up staying. And he said the next night he got it 100 times worse. They came in closer. You know, it seems like they're ramping up the aggression, the territorial aggression. If you don't leave, you're going to have bigger problems. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And like I told you the other day, I never really even thought about this part of the situation until we talked the other day. But when you turn onto that road, there's an apple farm right on that road, on the corner of that road. And it's probably a 200-acre apple farm. And this is in Long Creek, South Carolina. There are a lot of apple farms up there. If you just drive through that area, I mean, there are people on the side of the road selling apples all over the place. There was an apple farm right there when you turn onto that road, and it's a huge apple farm. And I never really even put two and two together until we talked that they're probably up there eating those apples. I mean, there's apple tree after apple tree after apple tree, and, you know, it just would make sense for them to be up in there eating the apples and then progressing back down into, you know, the areas where people aren't going to be at. And then you got the river right down there, and I don't know if they catch fish or whatnot, but there's a trout hatchery miles up the river, so there's trout all on that river as well. So I don't know. Like I said, I've never experienced anything like this before. I've never had anything like this ever happen, but I know from what I've heard other stories that from your show, other people talking about that the rock throwing, and like I told you the other day, I said, you know, the thing that really confuses me about this whole story is that in those mountains there are rocks, and there are rock faces all over in those woods. But the area that we were staying at, there aren't really any rock faces. In order for something to get their hands on the rocks that they were throwing, they'd have to like dig in the dirt to get them. And I have been all up in those woods. I have walked all through those trails, I mean, over and over again over the years. There is just not like a big score of rocks for something to get their hands on. this thing had its hands on a pile of rocks before it did this whole ordeal. Because there were rocks being thrown over and over and over again. It's not like they could just reach down on the ground and just pick up a rock. I mean, there's just not rocks laying around like that. So, like I told you, I don't know if it had a basket full of rocks that it was throwing. I don't know, but it just doesn't make sense.
I think in the situation that you're in, it wouldn't shock me if there was more than one. I realize you guys were kind of focused on the one. You could kind of hear it moving around, growling, grunting, throwing rocks. But in situations like this, you're usually never alone. There's probably more than one. There are probably more than one throwing rocks at you.
Well, like you said the other day, you said that you asked me if it was moving around really fast, and that was one of the things that I talked to my buddy about, because we heard it like moving around like really quick. Like 1 minute it'd be in front of us, the next minute it'd be over towards that trail, the next minute it'd be behind us. And you mentioned, you said you probably weren't alone, and I told my wife the story last night after you and I discussed this thing, and I had goosebumps running all up and down my arms, because I never really put two and two together to think there might have been more of them out there, around us, and we couldn't see them. We just didn't know.
I tend to agree with you. I really think there's probably more than one in that situation. Usually there's more than one. In these types of encounters, what you experience, Chris, where they're coming around your camp, and it's more of a go-away type of display. It's a very territorial type of display to try. I don't think necessarily they were trying to split you guys up. I don't even really think in these type of situations they even really want you. I think what they're trying to get you to do is go away. And it's usually done by more than one, especially in situations like this. Don't get me wrong, they can move fast. But if you're hearing it over here, now you're hearing it over there, now you're hearing it behind you, and now it's all around you, and you're getting hit with rocks left and right, it was probably more than one. Absolutely.
Well, like I told you yesterday, I never was hit with a rock. None of them ever hit me. It basically landed at our feet, and a bunch of them went over our heads and beside our heads, but never hit us. And like I said, we were sitting on the picnic table, so, I mean, if something really wanted to hit us, if it had a good aim, it could have hit us right in the freaking forehead. I mean, it wouldn't have been hard. And as close as I could hear the sounds, I mean, it was close. I mean, it was not far away, 20, 30 yards away from us. And, for me, I could have thrown a rock and hit somebody from that far away, and it never hit us. And, that's another thing that's just baffled me. Like, if this thing was trying to hit us with rocks, why didn't it do that? I just don't know.
Yeah, and that's another good question. I don't really know. I don't think their aim is as good as people say, or you'll hear researchers say, they can get you from 100 yards away with a rock. I don't believe that. I don't think their aim is as good as people say. I think they throw rocks like you and I would throw rocks, and you might get hit, you might not get hit. I've heard it every ways from Sunday. You know what I mean? I've heard it, every which way. And so sometimes when in those situations, they may not have been necessarily trying to hit you. I think it was more or less just go away. We're in the area, go away type of behavior. If we hit you, great. If we don't hit you, fine. But go away. In the meantime, I'm going to break these branches. I'm going to grunt and growl at you. And my buddies are going to toss rocks at you. And we're going to try and terrorize you to where you don't want to be here anymore. You just want to leave. You really don't want to, if they really were looking to come in and get you guys, they would have came into camp, and it would have been a face-off. Thank God your buddy had a gun in case something like that happened. But I really think in this situation it was more territorial. It was more of, hey, we're in the area, go away type behavior, trying to get you to leave. And then the moment when you get up from the table and you're walking up trail to leave, they're watching you the whole time, watching to see what you do, see if you guys split up. It's terrifying, man. It's a terrifying encounter. I don't blame you for not wanting to go back up there, when you experience something like that. The stories you hear where people give them apples and pet them on the head, it's not reality. This is reality. They don't want you to pet them on the head and give them an apple in situations like this. Generally, they want nothing to do with you. They just want you gone.
Well, I can honestly tell you that there's a gentleman that lives up in that area. I'm not going to say his name. but he is a local up there. And I told him the story. I'm good friends with the guy. I told him the story about what happened to me, and when I told him the story, he just gave me this really weird look. And I said, have you ever, he lives like, I don't know, maybe a half a mile from this area where this happened. And I said, have you ever experienced anything like this before? And he just gave me this really weird look, and he says, I don't know anything about what you're talking about. And I said, come on, man. I mean, you don't know anything about this? And he goes, I've never experienced anything what you're talking about. He said, but I will tell you this. He said, I got a friend of mine that lives in Florida, and he's got a big farm down there. And he said, my buddy has this farm, and all of his vegetables were getting taken away. And he said one day he went out there and looked in the mud. There was like an 18-inch footprint in the mud. He said, that's all I'm going to say. That's all I can tell you. And he never said that he didn't believe in it. He never experienced anything with it, but that's all he told me. He said, I'm just telling you, that's all I know. But the people that are up in those areas, I've talked to those people, and, you know, most of them blow me off, you know, like they don't know what I'm talking about. But that one guy, I mean, he lives there, and it seemed like he knew more than what he wanted to tell me. Because, you know, the ridicule, you know, factor of this whole thing, you know, it's a whole joke. You know, people just want to laugh at you like this is, you know, not real. And, you know, like I said to you yesterday when I spoke to you on the phone, I mean, I have been to the woods my whole life, and I know what a stick break sounds like, and I know what a small stick sounds like when it breaks, and I know what a large branch sounds like when it breaks, and it is loud. And when this thing was coming down that hill towards our camp, those branches breaking out of those trees were loud. They were not small sticks breaking. This had to be a huge creature to be coming down that hillside and just breaking branches. Like, it was like it made it its own path. Like, it didn't even matter which, you know, how it was coming down the hill. It just came right through all the brush, through the branches, and just broke every single branch on its way down. I've never experienced anything like that in my life. I mean, I literally thought like the world was about to come to an end. I didn't know what was happening when I heard all those noises. And I mean, that's really all I can say.
And I appreciate you sharing the encounter, Chris. I think a lot of people have these type of encounters to where, how do you explain it? You know what I mean? Any other natural predator or known predator in the area, if they're going to come in like this, you're going to have a fight. They're going to come in and they're going to fight. These things are different. They just kind of want you gone. I'm with you on the ridicule thing. It's a shame that goes on, because some of the best encounters are from hunters, hikers, campers. Hands down, the best encounter. People say police officers. I disagree. I'd talk to a hunter any day of the week over a police officer about their encounter, because guys that are out in the woods like you, Chris, they know what's out there. They know when it's a bear. They know when it's a cougar. They know when it's a person. And generally speaking, it's hard to scare a country boy off in those situations, because they already know what they're up against. But when they come across something like this, it freaks them out. They don't know what they're up against. They really have no clue what they're up against. Well, it's breaking branches. Well, it could be a bear. Okay, it charged down the mountain. Yeah, it still sounds like a bear. Okay, it started throwing rocks. That could be a person? Well, then it started grunting and growling. And then it's like, okay, did you run into a gorilla? You know what I mean? And so as you start listening to guys talk about their encounters, you can figure out really quick if they ran into a known predator like a bear, a cougar, or a person, or you can figure out really quick in those situations, these guys probably ran into a Sasquatch or a group of Sasquatches.
I mean, the thing is, man, when I was a kid, I mean, I was probably like, I don't know, 10, 12 years old. My father took my brother and I on a hike on the Appalachian Trail. We stayed up there for a week. We went on a week-long hiking trip. And my dad walked us down. There was a stream on a little creek on the side of the trail. We had set up our camp. We went down there. We washed ourselves off. We took a little bath in the creek. And as we walked back up, we encountered a bear. There was a bear on the creek. And my dad was like, hey, just be really quiet. Don't look at it. Just keep walking. And we'll walk back up to our campground. We walked back up to where we were camping at. The bear actually came up into our campsite that night and was walking around our tent. And my dad had his gun, and my dad woke us up in the middle of the night and he said, hey, be really quiet. There's a bear out here. And I know this is a bear. And it was walking around our tent. We had our food and everything hung up in the tree. Bears just don't act that, they just don't do that. I mean, I have been around bears a bunch of times. Like I told you the other day, I have seen bear. I've walked up on them, walking down the trails to go down to the river with my kayak. And as soon as they see you, they will turn around and dart off in the other direction. They do not want to encounter you. It just doesn't make any sense for something to come into our encampment and bother us the whole entire night. It wanted us out of there. But the problem was, like I told you, is that we could not leave because every single time that we tried to walk up that trail, it would block us off. It would dart right back over towards that trail, and we couldn't leave. I mean, I've never had more of a scarier encounter in my life than that.
Yeah, no, and I hear you on that. It's a fascinating encounter, and like I said, I really do believe that you guys ran into probably a group of Sasquatches, not just one. But I think you guys probably ran into a group, and it was a tutorial. It was a territory display. They wanted you to leave. They didn't want you to be there anymore. And it's a scary encounter, like you said, man. It's, bears don't throw rocks. For the audience out there that thinks Chris ran into a bear, well, bears don't throw rocks, and they don't grunt like a gorilla, and they don't growl the way you described. So, and they're out there. People think they just live here in Washington State where I'm at. That's not true. They're out there. They're out there in a lot of different areas. And so you have to be careful in those situations. I think you guys did the right thing by just packing up and leaving. I'm sure it wasn't I think when you guys packed up and left, that was the best thing to do in that situation. Because if you'd have stayed another night, it probably would have got much, much worse. It would have been more of a
There's no way we were staying there another night after that. And like I said, after that, I mean, I've never been back there again. Like I told you the other day, I've walked through that area. I have carried my kayak down through that area during the day, but I refuse to camp there. And it's really sad because, like I told you, I used to get off work, drive there, throw up a little tent, or maybe just lay beside the campfire and go to sleep. I refuse to do that anymore. And I mean, this is the closest river that I have to me. And it's an awesome river. I mean, I love that place. It's so beautiful in that area, but I cannot do the things I used to do up there since this experience. It scared me to the bone. I just can't do it.
And I can completely understand that. I get that feeling. I think with some time, you'll kind of get past that, but I get what you're saying. Trust me, I get what you're saying. You want nothing to do with it. You know what I mean? You want nothing to do with being up in that area.
No, not at all. And like I was telling you yesterday, the whole thing with the, David Pilates thing with, he has that concentration area up in the Blue Ridge Mountains, but it's right there at Cades Cove, around that area right there, and it's not far from where, we were at. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know. I haven't done a lot of research into this stuff. And to be honest with you, like I told you, I never believed in this. I only did research into this after this incident, and then came across your show, started listening to it, and then, like I said, every single time that I listen to one of the stories on your show, I get goosebumps because I know what it's like. I mean, I've experienced it, and like I said, I've never seen it. I didn't see the creature, but I know that it was there, and I know how big it was. I mean, something that's a small animal could not do what this animal was doing that night. It could not break those branches out of the trees like it was doing. I've never experienced anything like this. And, I mean, like I said, that's my story.
Yeah, I hear you, Chris. Well, Chris, I want to thank you for coming on the show, and I really want to thank you for sharing the encounter. I know sometimes when people listen to the show, they think I'm just interested in people getting eaten by Sasquatches or, some of the crazier stuff you hear. But all this other stuff is important because I think the bulk of the encounters you hear are like your encounters, especially from hunters. And I can't thank you enough for coming on. So thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for sharing the encounter with myself and the audience, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much, Wes. I really appreciate it. I really like your show. I listen to it all the time. I mean, I just can't wait for a new show to come out because as soon as it does, I'll listen to it. And like I told you earlier, goosebumps every single time, man. I mean, your show really scares me sometimes because of the encounter I had. But anyway, man, you do a really good job. I really appreciate you going out of your way to give people like me a chance just to tell our story and, say what happened to us.
Thank you, brother.
I really appreciate it.
And that's it for tonight, everyone. Remember, if you've had an encounter, shoot me an email, wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. I have an interesting show for Sunday. I'm kind of leaning towards just making it a member-only show. There's a lady out in Ohio, and her aunt actually had Sasquatch on the property, and has a lot of interesting encounters. I'm going to bring the aunt on too as well, but look for that on Sunday, and then throughout the weekend and probably most of early next week, I'll be posting videos for you guys. Let me know what you think of them. If you think they're worthwhile, or if you guys don't think they're worthwhile, let me know. But throughout the weekend, I'll be posting videos, and they'll be a little bit longer. The introduction one was just kind of a short and sweet video that we did, and I really hope you guys enjoyed it. Until next time, everyone, have a great night.